Memory is fascinating with regard to trauma, but even in generally speaking. So memory, we also have to think about memory also as having both internal and external inputs. And I think, again, we focus a lot on what came to us in terms of our hippocampus and external input, but also our memory, and the large bulk of our memory really has to do with memories about internal input that we have. Again, emotions and sensations that we have. We learn a few ways. We certainly learn through repetition, right? We can learn rote math facts if we practice them again and again. But I learned probably only 6 months ago that we actually learn more effectively through what they call emotional tagging. And this will make sense to everybody if you just think intuitively. We remember things that have some emotional salience to us, right? That makes sense. It's much easier than something we're just trying to do from rote memory. When we have experiences, they get encoded into memories, and that's usually an expectancy for a firing of a neuron. But what I want us to focus on in this one is what a memory is about an expectation for what's going to happen in the future. I'm like looking at her with her time signs. Don't even hold those signs. And so a firing of a particular neural network, a social engagement neural network, for example, alters the probability that it will fire again in the future. So coming around to implicit memory versus explicit memory. Explicit memory is everything we purposely recall and can retrieve. It's what we learn in school. It's what I say today. It is all of those memories, right? In contrast with implicit memory is early memory prior to birth. It begins at about 8 months of age developing, where explicit memory doesn't develop until we're 2 to 3 years of age. Implicit memory is largely outside of our awareness, and that seems weird to think about, but what I want you to think about is it just means that those do not have a neuronal connection with our prefrontal cortex. Okay, there's just not a thought connection. There's neural connections, but not including the thinking prefrontal cortex of our body. They're body-centered, they're emotions, they're sensory motor, they're subjective. We have a better understanding thus far of explicit memory than we do implicit memory. However, people have heard me say this, and I have to say it because it's always an important thing for us to think about. If you think about your day-to-day life, the decisions you make on a day-to-day basis in your relationships, in your work, in your private life, all of those things, and you think about what percentage of your behavior is driven by implicit memory versus explicit memory, what would you say that percentage is? What percentage of your behavior day to day is solely based on implicit memory? What I hear? 80? That's kind of scary, isn't it? Anybody argue with them? What else did I hear? A lot. It is actually a terrifying number for you all. Just so everybody can be uneasy today, the amount of our behavior driven by implicit memory is between 95 and 99% of our daily behavior. I've said with other audiences, I joke, I think that mine's better now because I know this fact, but I know that that is certainly not true. I just want to say a couple quick things about memory and stress. When we have stressful experiences, and we can do this range, right? We can do from I feel really stressed today about my job all the way to big T trauma and the adverse childhood experiences we talked about. But when we have something that's particularly stressful, and the more stressful or terrifying it is, two things happen. Number one, we get in our lower part of our brain, our fear part of our brain, so our prefrontal cortex isn't engaged, which means we do not encode explicit memories. So when people say they don't remember, the truth is they do not remember explicitly what happened. However, we actually begin to encode implicit memories even stronger, which makes sense, right? Our implicit memory is supposed to keep us alive, and the implicit memory is saying to us, this is scary, this is bad, this feels horrible, never forget this. It would be grand if our explicit memory was online with that, and then we knew exactly what that was about, but what happens for folks is they're engaged in a situation, they get very strong, visceral emotions and sensations. However, we don't have any thoughts associated with them to help that to make sense. If we expose the hippocampus to cortisol over long periods of time, which is included in our stress response system, our hippocampus will actually atrophy. It will calcify over time.